Chapter 19. How Osred journeyed to the meeting point. Sparks from Osred's campfire crackled to the high heavens, and in the warm oval glow of orange and red, the soldiers warmed themselves and spake at length. They sat whittling branches, skinning beasts for the spit, and of the two squires for whose return they awaited, shared thoughts. Osred toasted them.
All good fortune go unto those two braves. I doubt not they shall make a fine pair of warriors upon their return. For is it not so that there is naught better than to learn thy trade as a warrior upon a venture such as theirs? One must win spurs in the face of peril. So, then, shall they be given the most glorious test?
Aye, I'm almost jealous of their departure,
quoth Morcerus, who sat idly twiddling his clay pipe betwixt his fingers.
Would that I were younger, and I should go along with them and be a squire once more. Ah, how I remember when I won my spurs. 'Twas a great day, for in the very moment of battle when fear gripped me, the tide turned in me. Where I had once been afeard, I looked to face my foe again, and a great shadow was dispersed by the light. The cloud of youthful ill-judgment lifted. Then didst I strike my enemies down emboldened. The day was ours, and when we returned home, there was such fanfare. The king himself, with thankful eyes, laid spurs about my feet, for word had reached him that so impassioned my advance had been, a swathe had I pushed, and thence encircled our foes, tipping the balance of power. I myself was unaware of my deed until he spake so.
Then shall we decorate these squires all the more upon their return, finding their exploits mightier than thine, Morcerus. For the battle betwixt man has its merit, no doubt, but to venture into the depth of the dark wood, that is a task of dire consequence, if our experience is to go by,
said Anvindir, who was ever the voice of reason.
Good luck indeed go with them, for they shall need it tenfold, I trow. Verily, they will be much deserving of their spurs.
Indeed they shall, Anvindir, but remember what the bard said, in such a place as this, do those who travel lightest travel least noticed. We therefore are the greater target, and so it is we who shall draw the shortest straw. Not that I complain, for if it is peril we attract away from our squires, then there is much good in that at least,
said Alvin.
And what dost thou think, bard?
The bard sat quietly plucking his lute, which he had unveiled lovingly from his words. He ceased his strumming and placed his hands over the strings to pause their noise, then looked upon the men.
Of all the fates most thoroughly written, theirs is as may be chiselled into stone. Thus ought we not to dwell on their errand, for the Nerns have them in hand. Instead, men, think upon thy own rest, gently to sleep, and in the morning kinder judgment upon thy captain give. Well said, bard,
quoth Osred, coming to sit beside him with a leg of meat.
Come, brothers, all take food, drink, and then rest whilst we may, for on the morrow hath we a great journey to complete.
Though most of the company took Osred's advice, Morcerus looked out upon the night as it descended bitterly cold, and hoped the squire's resolve was greater than what might come against them. As they found their tents, the soldiers' breaths billowed up in plumes of mist against the illumination of the fire. Soon all had turned in from the cold. Only Osred, like a doting father, remained awake, cogitating as they left.
Oh, how I wish I had all the knowledge of those learned folk locked up in the towers of the White Castle. If I had foresight on such matters as the way ahead, I would need not have sent those two rascals off. But here we are. May Fortuna guide them well.
As the veteran finished his thought, he stared from his seat, and as he did, he swore that for a moment there glimmered two smaller orbs of light below the prime moon Ichthus. They seemed embedded in the mountainside ahead.
It cannot be,
he said, rubbing his eyes, by which time the orbs vanished.
My eyes are long overdue rest.
As he entered his tent, there he found sleep. But indeed it may have been prudent for him to raise alarm. For as the hours passed, and darkness had fully besieged and conquered light, so did the creeping hands of an unwelcome poacher enter the tent of a soldier. Hakon. Like a bear whose salivation is tweaked by the distant scent of a carcass, here did a troll, now slavering, fondle in the dark for his prey. With spider-like fingers grasping, the troll hoped to hook upon that which produced perfumes so delectable to it. Its nostrils had not smelt such rare delicacy for many moons. Yet now its pupils dilated at the thought of supping upon the flesh of man. There is no question that the dreams of Hakon, unrested though they may have been, were nothing so terrifying as that which then befell him. In a flash, as soon as the fingers felt supple man-flesh, Hakon was snatched up, wrenched from his bed and tent. Then the other hand of the troll joined its partner, and set to pulling Hakon apart, stretching him until the poor man's joints popped and his limbs dislocated. The troll, thinking to make light work of the soldier, fancied portioning him into bite-sized chunks. Limb by limb it thought to eat him. But as the heinous screams of Hakon filled the air, and before his comrades could don their armour to reprieve or even contemplate a defence of this new terror, there was another howl more terrible than any which had been heard that night. Down tumbled the troll in a great crash, discarding the yielding Hakon, as a wolven creature who had appeared from the darkness, now gnashed at its neck. The two mismatched gladiators fell this way and that in chaotic madness. Hakon was lucky that night, for little by little the wolven beast gained the upper hand and slew the troll, though in truth it was a feat that came with a price. The wolven creature fared little better from the fray, now lying in terrible pain, with a caved-in chest from the troll's hammering fists. Hakon, injured and crawling, drew close and saw the sparkle of sentience in the eye of the beast growing dim. The creature was shaped like a man, and armoured in a familiar fashion. He caught the eye of Hakon, and let out a final wheezing plea.
Warrior, take from me my canines, when I hath passed, and find ye the western crag Athnanon, wherein my clan abide. Show them there mine teeth, and speak of this deed I have rendered. Then shalt I hath done my people proud, when they hear that Morthwael hast saved the life of noble man.
With that, Morthwael breathed his last, and Hakon made good on the deceased's wishes, though not until morning, whereby his limbs had regained their former strength. For now the displaced soldier found rest once more in Morcerus's tent, and the late night ensued. For the rest of his journey, Hakon would wear the teeth of the fallen Morthwael as a necklace until he found the caves of Athnanon. In the morning, the men found Hakon's tent destroyed, and together re-erected it, collecting his wares and setting them right. Then they headed out to forage. When they returned, the whole camp had been set to ruin. Pots, pans, armors, weapons, foodstuffs, and all were upheaved and displaced. Osred drew his sword, but time passed without incident. The perpetrator had long since fled. Instead, the dark woods were silent as the grave, by which the company felt mocked. Something had ruined their camp, in spite of all their skills of cunning and alertness. All were surpassed. There was no clue to what may have done this deed, but in Osred's mind the two vanishing orbs that flashed in his memory of that night past. He shivered to think they may have belonged to the culprit.
Make haste, men. We have overstayed our welcome, it seems. Let us break camp. Though, forsooth, much of that work has been done for us. Salvage what thou canst. We must begin on our road again, lest whatever tempest at work here returns to plunder upon our nakedness.
He sheathed his sword and began helping the others. Soon they were mounted. All was assembled in double speed, and the breakfast they had foraged for had to wait. Instead, upon the road they supped what meagre findings they had. Osred's company took a winding path away from Ventthor, through a long clearing where the sky was dominant above them. They dared not enter the tangle of the woods where the squires had gone, since their steeds would not contemplate it. And so the company and the squires were destined to go very far from each other. Being mounted, Osred's men could at least make up the ground as they pressed forth at a determined pace. By day, Osred was key in navigation, and by night the bard was chiefest in knowledge of the stars. Osred was an expert track-picker who saw worrying signs outlaid in the ground, things which he for now shook from his mind, as though he was mistaken. In spite of doing so several times, there became a great weight in his heart that his conscience could bear no longer. As they eventually entered yet another deep wood, in which the men were flanked by dark shadow, he surreptitiously made inquiry with the bard about such things that may have lurked within that place. For as they further plumbed the depths, he would swear great lumbering shapes sauntered in the darkness. The trees were so tall and tightly packed that there was next to no light penetrating within. Only the channel in which Osred's band made their way was vacant. Into it fell a meek beam of dappled light.
Bard, dost thou know anything of the provenance of this wood in which we pass?
Asked Osred.
Nay, Captain, I must admit, so vast is the dark wood that there are many stories attributable. I cannot say with certainty to which wood they belong, except, of course, Amalgeth, which is a sorrowful story that we are well clear of.
The bard stroked his chin and ruminated.
This place, being as it is well stocked with sturdy, tall-trunked pines, could be one of several locations of legend.
And of them, be they accounts of good or of malice that thou knowest?
Well, take me for a gloommonger, sire, but those which I have remembered are two of malice, though there is one which is an ode of joy dedicated to the legendary knight Xandred, who found great companionship in a griffin, upon whose sturdy back many an errand wrought. There is also a fourth which speaks of enchantments.
Well, thou may dispense with the third, since our currency on this errand is peril. Of what then in that regard doth thou hold?
Well, if it is such a place, then it may be named Dumbadar, and the legend speaks of Father Time and one of his sons, an ancient spirit, born upon the wind. Thereupon did he render his fair rule to all, monitoring the dispersions of all trees with the caring hand they require, to seed their progeny. He, like the ancients, was a shepherd of sorts, an arborist amongst many other things. At any rate, he tended them with great devotion, but something awry came unto them, a dark blight in the form of six-legged beasts, that lay waste to all he had looked over. He rightly enraged, seeing their decimated corpses, turned to the few remaining, and poured powers into them which they oughtn't to have been given. They became like men, limbs to walk, and arms to wield, terrible their visage. The wood became living, as art thou or I, and the tree folk sought what evil had maimed their siblings. In the dark recesses of the wood did they find a terrible witch by the name of Thigadir, whose malevolence knew no bounds. It was by her hands the plight beasts came, but this was just a precursor. Her darkest deed was in the process when they found her, chanting to raise a demonic overlord from Vitkahalj in the midst of the wood. Before she fully realized her plan, it was the tree folk who greeted her with grimaces that ran even her evil heart cold. They smote upon her without a moment's notice, and thereby the plight ceased with her demise. All the evil in the wood subsided, and all was good for a time. Word spread back to the Father of Time that his son had contravened the benevolence and the benignity of the position he was bestowed, and so with dire consequence was the son of Father Time indicted. He was banished from his prosperous realm, and made to chill the hearts of all. No longer was he the master of fair winds, bearing plenteous fruit. Instead was he the boatswain who brought lamentable gales, whose whip cracked upon the rooftops, and whose blustering pulled babe and mother into the abyss. He was chained to toil in such a way against his will, and his forest was left to the devices of time. Legend plots not the forest of that story, but it could be these very trees we pass, of which some are the living remnants of the son of Father Time. It is true that though we think our world cruel, that of the spirits is bound by a firmer rule than we. With great power must accountability be severe when used unwisely.
Even as the bard uttered his last word, the sky cracked with lightning and thunder.
Well, it seemed they agree with thee, Bard, or they scold me for inquiring. Well met, spirits,
shouted Osred in reply. The men within earshot laughed. Osred looked about at the domineering pines that shouldered one another. In the darkness, their misshapen bark played havoc with the pareidolia of Osred's mind. His men, too, now saw within each towering trunk a face of horrible proportions. They all felt minuscule, but the sentinel trees were silent. Thus, like well-carved statues, were they reverentially admired. Osred pried further, for to his mind the moving shadow seemed not like a tree.
And what of the other tales, Bard?
Well now, it could well be the wood of Pengilead in which the next tale is bound, a desperately old tale whose writing is crude. Upon my memory shall I have to dig deep on its particulars. Yes. I remember the names now. Yes, one quite like our recently departed friend El was named Aella, and his sweetheart with whom he travelled was called Ilona. Now thou must note that in times gone by, travelling to and from villages was deemed by the common folk a terribly dangerous business. Thus they raised concerns of peers who strayed too far. Those that did became outlaws, and such an epithet was a dark mark to be worn. Aiello was a craftsman, and from his uncle's workshop window eyed a village lass named Ilona. He had long doted over her, for she was a wondrous beauty amidst those few hundred inhabitants of his village. Thus, upon the right moment, he seized and impressed upon her the innards of his heart. She reciprocated. So then did they contrive to escape their duties under the guise of falsehood, and being foolish youths, absconded in pursuit of making a new life together in the wilds. Foolish indeed they were, for the further they went, the longer they strayed into the unfamiliar land, and soon lost their way. They, of course, were none the wiser until two age-old things happened. The toll of curfew bells rang out, and the light of day began to fade. A trifling issue, one might think, who amongst us is a warrior? Indeed, thou mayst snigger if thou think such things are innocuous, for they are now. But in those days there was good reason for the fear maintained by simple townsfolk, who locked their doors of an eve, who bolted their windows and brought livestock into bed. Aye, for even as the bell rang out in curfew, Ilona trembled at the returning hate-filled calls that lit up from the land around. It was a low, grunting holler of beasts in the marshes, which in those days still roamed freely, and who that night angrily protested the ringing of the bells. Each time the bell sounded, the grunts loudened, fiercer they became, echoing through the land and valley beyond, acknowledging against their will that all towns who rung so would be safe from the beast's invasion. Aiella and Ilona were greatly afeared, and thought to turn back home, but they were a great distance from their town. Upon the 12th strike, the tolling stopped. Then the beasts, who had shrank from the noise, grew emboldened again, and began to hunt in the lands for those who were astray, those like Aiella and Ilona. All inhabitants in the low fields had long since returned to the safety of their dwellings. All the woodsmen departed from their cabins, all the coal-burners and quarrymen away from their posts, all but those two intrepid youngsters. The dusk settled, and they were further confounded by the ensuing gloom. In his naivety, Aiella shouted out for help, where he had thought he saw another wayfarer ahead of him, who may lend a hand to their plight. But lo, the shape was well aware of him and his lover, long before he of it, a grey demon, which to itself conferred conceitedly how it could not believe its luck.
When the hamlet bells doth strike, old souls afield be in sight, of town's gate before night, or else in fright of demon might, with me a light. To doom's door shall I them goad, for the cock hath crowed, bell hath tolled, and lover's road hath like a book closed.
Upon that he leapt forward to devour them both, but Aiella dashed in betwixt his love and the demon, shouting, "Hail, demon! Steal not our lives away, but grant us a task that we may keep our lives this night, and be granted freedom by the rise of day." The demon stopped in his tracks, and thought to humour himself by giving an impossible task to them, for he, like all his ilk, was vile and disturbed. Comedy to him was what thou or I would find grim and debasing. Bloody murder thrilled him. Thus he entertained Aiella's wish.
Bold peasant, lover errant, I say very well, if thou wouldst lift my spell, by the answer of this. I have a heart that does not beat, I have a leg yet many feet. I am a king, yet they think me low. But though they bow, I shall not do so. What am I?
Eller thought hard, yet he was in no ways a scholar. His mind was not filled with answers to riddles, but as such the answer presented itself to him, for he did not know of any other it may have been. His judgment therefore was not clouded. The answer is a pelargorn tree, for they are lowly at first, but grow to a great height, and do not bend in the wind, for their many roots are deeply founded. The demon laughed bitterly, with the same harrowing call as he had lamented the bell tolls.
Very good, peasant. Then make it so that thou find'st the seeds of that specimen, and to me bring them. For in them is held great power. A fortnight shalt thou have. Only then, on receipt, shall I release thee into the world, free of all fetters.
Eller looked at Ilona cheerily, for he thought they could at least journey together. But a bargain with a demon holds many caveats and clauses. Many lie unseen and are devious.
Nay, take that thought from thy mind. She is my insurance,
said the demon, catching Ayla's gaze. He then flung his wings around poor Ilona, who fell down in fear.
If thou wishest to see thy love again, do this thing for me, and I shall return her unto thee, and thou shalt both be free. Yet do it not, and I shall flay thee both, and eat thy livers.
Ayla spake in anger. Lay not thou webbed hands or waxen wings upon her, demon, and thou shalt have thy infernal tree, if thou wouldst give me thy word.
Bold peasant, choose thine words with care, lest thy tongue is plucked from thy head. Thou hast no bargain to make with me. This maiden is my chattel now.
With that he clicked his fingers and was gone in smoke. Eller, cut off and alone, had to find his way in the pitch dark. It was a long and arduous time that passed for him, and the legends differ on the outcome. Some say he was successful, and he obtained the seeds, whilst others speak of a more grisly end, whereby the carpenter and his love are kept still, slaving and toiling in the chasm of Vidgahalj. One thing is certain, though, it would be in a place such as this wood, in which we would have found the pelargorn seed, for they grow here. Look, see upon the roots of every spruce there is a grey discoloration. That is the spore of the pelargorn. Had we time, I should go and collect some myself, for it is of great worth in medication and in the woodcraft of Ayla. I presume, if the story is true, that a demon would have wanted it for the power of foresight, with which it is said the seeds are imbued. At any rate, here could it be that the tale of Ayla unfolded.
A dark tale indeed, if the latter was the outcome, Bard, though in my heart I hope it was not so for Ayla. I expect we shall never know unless we venture to the bits of Vidgahalj, whereby some vacant soul may take us to the toiling place of Ayla and Ilona. Even I should not wish to venture there to find out. Now, what of the tale of enchantment? These other tales have their merit indeed, but as thou sayest, there is little to commend their association. Is the third tale more certain?
I could not say, Osred. There indeed is the crux of the matter. But thou may take thy pick of which tale suits thee. I am sure the place will not take offence, at any rate. Interestingly, the tale of enchantments, that tale is one thou ought to know already, for it is entwined with the history of a man who thou and I both hath had the misfortune to encounter. A blood-soaked warlord, which rumour doth portend the dark woods to be his hiding place, his lair. 'Twould be convenient if it were somewhere hidden in these lands. It is true that there is little else to speak of his dwelling in our world.
The Wolf of Malbagorm,
interrupted Osred.
Aye, even he.
Thou know as well as any that I despise his name, as doth every young squire learning to wield the sword. The battlefield on which we met, his grim mark he left. Thou knowest I have rarely been defeated in battle. Indeed, whilst my good men are here at my back, and my command is chiefest, we have never been bested. But when the old fate saw fit that the interests of our employ were not worthy of victory, 'twas the Wolf of Malbagorm who claimed the day. All I know is he attacks when the fray has commenced, when sides have collided. From the shadows he comes, prowling with his army, they call the Black Legion. They strip away the flesh from all sides. Aye, 'tis a terrible sight to see the wolf descend upon a troop of men. Like salmon caught in a basket, he scoops them up, floundering, and impales them sorely, leaving the field of battle drenched in blood. Then, as mysteriously as he appears, he vacates the land. He wishes not for accolade. His trophy is one made of gore and bone. If thou thinkest he is the one associated with this wood, speak now, and we shall give the order to beat for battle.
Well, woods such as these he may inhabit, for it is said the Black Legion make their dwellings in dark ground, though perhaps even he would not be so bold to stay within the boundaries of such a place, albeit the perfect hideout if he did wish to do so.
Men, keep thy eyes peeled, and upon thy hafts ready thy hands,
shouted Osred, turning to his soldiers in preparation. He himself lent a hand to his hilt.
Indeed, thou do rightly to prepare, but thou concluded my story overly soon, for the Wolf of Malbagorm is but a part in the tale, such was I about to relay.
Then hastily, Bard, relay it. Mince not the details if dire peril is at hand.
Ah, now, Osred, hurry not the words of a bard. They must be respected.
He cleared his throat and began.
In the time of the wolf's youth is where I shall begin. They say he was born in the old times, 400 years ago, in the realm of Merihest, to the name of Ulfnade. He saw the decimation of all he cared for, chiefest of which his mother, Serendel, was given the most humiliating end. She was hoisted upon a spit by her husband's enemies, impaled right in front of the shadow-hiding Ulfnade. They were dark times indeed, and Ulfnade knew that point keener than most, for they took from him his tongue and made him a slave. Yet he was born under the sigil of the wolf, and like the canine species, he was resilient and wily. He escaped his captors, and to the hills resided, wherefrom he struck out and killed many, who had a hand in his misery. Aye, 'twas then his revenge ought to have been laid to rest, but alas his enmity grew, and the hand of an ancient dark power, they say, descended upon him in those hills. It was there he grew monstrous, and drew great strength. His bloodlust would not be sated.
Before the bard could continue his tale, there was a great deluge exerted against all their backs, as though something had rolled over them. The company darted their eyes this way and that, and halted their steeds. All about them flickers and flashes of golden light darted in and out betwixt the trees.
Why comest thou, weary soldier, henceforth into the lair of danger?
Breathed a strange voice into all their ears, as though it was spoken within their very innermost thoughts, and not without.
Come ye not further, stay ye.
It whispered.
What trickery is this?
Questioned Osred, unsheathing his sword and looking about him. Again and again, there came flashes of orange and gold like the fluttering of woodland birds. Yet as they tried to see what the dancing lights were, their vision was impaired. The lights darted here and there behind the trees, and there they disappeared, along with the strange voice.
Something ancient resides in these woods, Osred,
whispered the bard.
I do not like it. Let us turn from this road, even if it means doubling back.
As he spake, a flurry of winged creatures rushed through the wood, squawking to one another. One may have mistaken them for crows or some other bird, but in truth the birds of the dark wood were altogether disquietingly grim, having fanged beaks and waxen wings. They shrieked like banshees as they went, being disturbed from their roosts. Osred, despite this, was still determined to go forth.
Nay, Bard, unless thou hast good reason, be still. We must try and push further this way. To go back will be our undoing, and we must keep our unison.
A time passed with no event, yet the men were eager. On occasion a faint golden dust would tumble down from the treetops, like snow, and vanish before it reached the ground. The men advanced ever slower, spears and axes at the ready. However, there was some slight solace in their imminent deliverance. For no great distance away, they saw the trees parting, and a familiar dark grey sky. This may have been the end of the wood, but before they reached it, there was a clatter of horns, and what seemed like a great host drumming deep beneath the ground. All around them the world rumbled.
Hold, men!
Shouted Osred. A flash of light burst into view that seared their eyes, then dissipated. As it left, there was a strange sight to behold, a wall of recursive mirrored flame that seemed to contain another world deep within. Green fecund beauty abounded therein, and it was surrounded by a dazzling border which span like a golden wheel of fire in the soldiers' eyes. Osred was rightly wary, and thought to dispel their gaze.
Soldiers, close thy visors, avert thy eyes. Make not one more move lest we fall into some trap. Slowly pace backwards,
he said, in a disparaging whisper.
Why dost thou turn away from paradise?
Questioned the strange voice, now returned from before, emboldened.
Dost thou not seek rest? Assuredly thou art weary, tired, and hungry. Come, let thy cares be forgotten in the bosom of plenty.
Hearken not, soldiers. Stay strong, it is falsehood,
called Osred.
No trick, brave knight.
Titillated the voice.
Look upon us.
At that very moment, the flames raged, and in the parallel world there emerged a wall of golden figures, translucent nymphs, clad in flowing vestments, made of some unknown ethereal fabric which floated about them as though submerged in water. Mockingly, the leader of them aped Captain Osred's advice, saying,
Come not ye further, worthy travellers, despite such rest offered in the arms which thou seest before thee outstretched. Here, upon a welcoming lap, place thy head until all woe has subsided, and fresh limbs hast thou regained.
Osred saw the grip of his steadfast men loosening around their swords and spears. Transfixed, they began to drop their weapons and walk toward the nymphs.
Hear me, men. Do not go towards them. Close thy ears. They speak untruth. Hold thy heads higher than thy hearts. Come, think. Lift not thyself to these maidens. This is the work of evil doing.
Alas, his words were increasingly dulled unto all listeners, as though he spoke to one ever more deeply submerged. Some of the older soldiers were able to shake themselves free of the spell, and in turn wrenched the others back to their sides.
Come, fools, listen to thy captain.
Quoth Corbinian.
Osred is thine beacon to hold true to. Focus thereupon.
Old Osred will see us through,
added Mortimus. With great determination the others came to and began to free themselves of the spell which pulled against them like a furious storm. The beckoning nymphs did not relent, of course, and it took strength akin to that exerted fighting a great battle to resist. They were sorely exhausted by the time they slipped from the nymphs' grasp, who followed the men like predators, with further tempting taunts causing confusion amongst the company. The soldiers pushed on through the wood and came to its boundary, where they were freed from the leash that the nymphs could wield. Thereupon was it revealed to them a distant bald hill barren of any tree or bush or anything else except one dark edifice, standing high and imposing. It was a stone tower that was raised above a circlet of other smaller crooked walls.
It is here, Osred,
said the bard.
That is it, the lair of the Wolf of Malbegorn.
So it is true.
Then we shall stand and fight,
said Osred.
No matter of his leading, nor his stalking of us. No doubt in the shadows hath they watched us already, but at least we are well armed for him. Rather would I die in battle than slip into lustful dishonor at the hands of nymphs, or turn tail.
Osred's words were seconded by Mortimus.
Aye, we are few, but ready for battle, no less. Looks as though our road here endeth. Farewells and forgiveness must we give another time. Now our hands must turn to the work of war.
Nay, brave warriors, this is not the time to make thy stand,
sung the nymph at the front of the throng of her sisters. seemingly the chief amongst them for her resplendent wear.
Thy numbers are too small to do battle against the Dark Lord. Go thee no further this day.
Halt thy advances, and stay with us instead,
said another from the boundary behind.
Our souls are as lost as thine art. We urge thou to get ye down from thy steeds, and to tend with errant love the quest of our rescue instead. Then shalt thy mission be complete, and thou shalt be safe to go home with the knowledge of thy great success.
Another spake.
Yes, brave knights, come to succour and to rest, but think not on yonder hill. Great woe is there for thee. Instead, entreat with me upon thy restitution, and I, being kindly, shall reward ye much.
Some of the men began to stare again, but Osred with his great booming voice gave his usual command, and battered against his shield with his sword so that the noise shook the men from their involuntary desertion.
Be steady, warriors. See not in their eyes deception.
The bard then turned to the golden figures, saying,
Nymphs of the wood, muses of the ancients, thy intention may be true and kind, but tempt not the transient heart of man, for he cannot withstand the purpose for which thou wert fashioned. Thy insatiable charity and thy ewery was designed for those who had life everlasting. Cause us not to tarry. Our course is already overly riddled with peril. Let us pass. Wilt thou insist on bringing these goodly men to their deaths by thy insatiable appetite? Delude them not, and thou shalt in time be rewarded, I swear, for by our mission shall thy freedom surely come to.
The nymphs looked to one another, giggling, and began to talk amongst themselves. The bard seized the moment.
Osred, now, whilst they deliberate, take the men and have them charged to safer climes. Turn from here, I implore thee. This is a day that victory averts. I shall distract the nymphs.
Osred conceded and took the soldiers away with haste.
Men, listen. In thy minds hear my voice. Let not their words cloud thee. The path is back whence we came. Oh, come, I beg thee, veteran soldiers, have resolve. Turn away. They offer only falsehood.
The soldiers slowly became aware again of their surroundings, and once more, realizing their brother's plight, pulled each other one by one from the strange transfixment that surrounded them. Some, who had dismounted, fell to the ground as though they had pulled the handles of a stiff door, which had suddenly become unstuck. This further woke them from their slumbers. Soon they were clambering like drowning rats back to safety, galloping with little semblance in the opposite direction of the eerie spectre-like castle, gaunt and grey atop the hill afar. The golden nymphs, with their mysterious beckoning behind them. Of course the bard was not amongst them, and though the men saw it not, he was able to divert the nymphs' attention by simultaneously appealing to them all personally.
Sisters of the woodland, go in peace, for I give thee this token of ancient times, here in my possession. If thou wouldst grant thy word, not to pursue these intrepid fellows with whom I travel. They are good men, and yet even the greatest of mankind cannot withstand or survive thy power, which was intended for the pleasure of the ancients. Harry them not, I beg, or else find my wrath set against thee. What is thy answer?
They all conferred, though in seeing their prey escape to safer climes were saddened deeply, and thus had no other option but to accept the bard's terms. Nymphs are incapable of dark or evil thoughts, but as one would not let a lion play with a child, much is it the same results with nymphs. They know not their own strength, and many adventurers had lost their lives to them, being tended beyond their natural life, never allowed to escape or to rest until death took them.
What token dost thou
Quoth
render?
their disconsolate leader.
Here in my hand I have the medallion of Lamperidoc, the seal of the King of the Southern Sea. If thou look upon it in the evening sky, when Mathbar is not full, look to the green star Kelirihad, and follow the course plotted on the face of this medallion. Then shalt thou surely find him in the sea caves of the south, and he shall love thee as his children once more. For so thou art. He hath reaped for thee for millennia, and caused the southern seas much tumult in thy absence. Many a sailor in the realm of Porpon doth curse and yet respect thy father for their struggles. So, if thou wouldst serve mankind, then this way would suit, and would thy father console. For he cannot stray far from the water's edge, though he batters the coasts with storms. He has no hope of finding ye. Go and give thy care to thy father in his dotage, and leave this place.
Indeed it was so, that the nymphs were the creation of the king of the sea, and indeed to tend him and the ancients was their intended purpose. Their tireless joy would not wear thin with those who lived forever. Yet from him they had escaped, as how a fancy-caged bird might seek freedom. The bard admitted that fact, but knowing they could perceive no wrong, caused them to travel home for the greater good of mankind, who had fallen foul of them for hundreds of years.
Our word on this shall be made, good bard,
said the lead nymph, who, though immensely beautiful, spoke then with a voice of ancient wisdom.
I thank thee, maidens of the netherworld. Farewell, I bid thee. Here, take the medallion.
The bard flipped the medallion into the air, in the direction of the shimmering whirl that momentarily spanned the trees. In receipt, out ventured a flaming, translucent hand of the lead nymph, who plucked the medallion out from the air and pulled it back toward her ethereal portal.
Farewell, wise bird. May thou savest thyself with thy honour and bravery upon such a dire errand.
The bard doffed his cap, reared his horse, and sped away without further word, rejoining his comrades, who by now had shook themselves free of the soporific spell.
Well, sirs, that was indeed a close call. But now that I know the whereabouts of the Wolf of Maldegorm, thus this gives me some hope of our direction. Welcome back, bard,
said Osred.
Aye, I shall mark this place well, for I'll not let the memory of this day rest until I have returned and slew the wolf on yonder promontory.
Hear, hear, Osred. But have we any chance of success in that goal? I know forsooth only if this bard travels with us again might we have a chance of winning. For how didst thou come to accord with the maiden nymphs?
Quoth Morcerus.
Such things a bard can only know. For in his words and music an enchanter's tongue has he, and to speak of how he did so would then enchant thee too.
It is certainly true. Thou hast silver in thy tongue, bard. Yet for a moment I feared a nymph's gold may be about thy lips, and thence would we have lost ye,
said Osred.
Ha, nay, nay. More powerful magic than that of a nymph would it take to have me thwarted. Fear thee not.
Osred then looked upon the wood, which he had so lamented to cross earlier.
So then, friend, looks as though thou were right. Now must we put all our trust in thy powers to deliver us from our drudgery, for there lies a rugged climb to pass.
As the captain spoke, Aldwin came to his side.
The men are all accounted for, my liege,
he said, out of breath.
It seems we had a lucky escape.
Aye, that we have, and to the bard here have we our thanks to give, else by the lust of fairer form wouldst we all thence be defeated. At any rate, thank ye, Aldwin. Have the men follow in close rank. As we enter over the threshold of the wood, methinks we shall not have seen the last of the wolf, nor will our journey be without event. Which shall be peeled tenfold, my man, tenfold!
Aye, sire,
shouted Aldwin. The company of soldiers did as commanded, and after being somewhat dazed by their near escape, soon returned to their usual cohesion and stalwartness. They trotted up the winding path toward the gloomy wood, whilst the day began its descent. In the wood, it was already as dark as night. Once again, the trees in that place were gargantuan in height, and each had attempted to dominate its neighbour, as they competed for a rival's meagre light. The last of the soldiers, Eagle's father and Morcerus, passed into shadow. Thereon in, they travelled in darkness, and Osred passed along the order to make no noise, save but for absolute emergency. Only he and the bard on occasion would whisper to each other indiscernible thoughts, but in the maddening darkness their whisperings were magnified, being the only sound. The journeying was tedious for its monotony. Despite the events of the day, every man, even those most exhausted, maintained their alertness, for they were keen not to fall behind. They were veteran enough of the dark wood to know that the shadows are scarcely vacant. So each was held upright by his thoughts of what may have lurked in the voids. The same thoughts were shared by all, disquieted and disturbed, unsettled by something unseen. In that wood, suspicion arose in them of being watched by a faceless foe, which made them feel utterly exposed, despite being hemmed in. Osred, out of all the men, was most concerned, for he could not forget the two pale discs he had seen disappear beneath Mather, and the great stalking shape in the woods. Though at the time he had shaken ill thoughts from his mind, he could not help but feel something else, other than the characters held within the tales of the bard lurked beyond. Only the soft thump of the horses' hooves and their occasional exhalation could be heard now. All sound had no echo, for it was absorbed completely by the denseness that surrounded it. Not even wind could penetrate down so far into the deep recesses. At least there was some consolation in that, for neither would their own noise travel to the ear of their enemy. Many hours passed, as did uncountable tree trunks, almost to the point that they were dizzied for the monotony of it all. The bard kept his eyes skyward at night, and in brief glimpses of clear sky he held course by the way of the stars.